Guys. We're starting a new unit today, a new unit called genetics. And genetics is the study of heredity. Heredity is how genetic traits are getting passed down from parent to child. So if you look at the young lady in this picture, you'll see that she has a lot of genetic traits. Genetic traits like the shape of her eyes, the color of her eyes, the shape of her eyebrows, the texture and the oiliness of her skin, the color of her skin. All of those things are genetic traits that she'll be able to pass along to her children. But now her stretched out gauged ears and the stretched out lower lip that she has the disc in will not be passed along to her children because those are not genetic traits. That's something that she's done on purpose to herself later in life. In her culture, that's a symbol of beauty. And so she has gauged her ears. But when her children are born, their ears will not have the hole in them. They'll have to do that themselves if they want to stretch out that ear again, because that's not a genetic trait. That's a modification she's made to herself later. Now, you can contrast her genetic traits with somebody like him. He's got much paler skin, where her nose is much flatter and smaller. His really sticks out and is much larger. His chin sticks out a lot farther than hers does, and his hair is a lot bushier than hers. Those are all genetic traits that he could pass along to his children. And you'll notice that if you look in certain parts of the world, you'll find people that have darker skin or lighter skin based on where they're from. It's kind of a fantasy to talk about black people and white people because there's no such thing really. We're all actually shades of brown. And it depends on where your ancestors came from as to whether you'll have a darker shade of brown or a lighter shade of brown. So people from very hot, very sunny areas will have darker skin because their ancestors needed that dark melanin in their skin to protect against skin cancer. The UV rays, if you're out in the sun all day in a very hot, very sunny location, will give you skin cancer really fast if you don't have the melanin in your skin to protect from it. So in places like South America, Africa, Australia, you'll find people who have darker skin tones because their ancestors were exposed to that sunlight all day, every day. And if they did not have that darker skin tone, they didn't survive very well there because of skin cancer. But now some of the human population moved north to some of the colder, darker climates where the sun was not out all day. It may have been actually very short periods of sunlight. And you may wonder, well, still, why didn't they remain dark skinned? Well, it's because the dark skin blocks not only sunlight, but it also cuts down on the amount of vitamin D that your body's able to make from the sunlight. And vitamin D is very important. Now, if you live in a place where there's a lot of sun, no problem. You get enough vitamin D anyway. But as people move north into colder, darker climates, their darker skin wasn't able to absorb the vitamin D well enough. But lighter skin can because it's allowing the UV rays to penetrate deeper into the skin. And so you absorb more vitamin D if you have pale skin than you do if you have dark skin. So you'll see that people from places like Norway and Greenland and Iceland, Canada, if their ancestors came from there, they will have much paler skin than the people in hotter, sunnier locations. And the only problems we experience now is if somebody from an area that's very sunny moves to a place that's very dark, they may actually have to take vitamin D supplements in order to have enough vitamin D in their system. And if somebody moves from a place that's very dark and has pale skin, and they move down to Florida or somewhere like that where there's a lot of sun, they'll have to wear sunscreen to avoid skin cancer. So you can look at people from all over the world, India, and other places and see what their skin tone looks like. And you can imagine, where their ancestors were coming from, a hot, sunny place like India or a darker, colder place. If you look at people like Will Smith, he's inherited the skin from a place that was sunnier. The darker hair, of course, protects against skin cancer. The darker skin protects against it. The oilier skin protects against drying out in the hot sun. This little girl here is also from a hot, sunny place, but not Africa. This girl is an Aborigine from Australia. And they have a lot of unique genetic traits themselves. As a matter of fact, by the time she is a young woman, her hair will be white. She has not dyed her hair here in the picture. Their hair doesn't stay dark until old age. Contrast her against someone like this, who's obviously from a colder climate, much longer, thinner face, a sharper nose, lighter skin tones. And you'll notice that people from hotter, sunnier places in the world will have a wider nose than people from colder places. And that's no accident. That wider nose creates a larger nasal cavity in the face here, which acts as a cooling mechanism. It prevents heat strokes. So there's a reason for it. If you see people from colder places in the world, they won't have that wider nasal cavity because their ancestors didn't need it. So like Johnny Depp here, very pale skin, very narrow nose. So everywhere in the world, you've got people passing along genetic traits from parent to child. Now, keep in mind that some things like tattoos or ear piercing or nose piercings, those are not genetic traits, so those won't be passed along. I've always liked this picture of Harold and Kumar because their skin tone is similar, their hair color is similar, but if you look at the shape of their face, it's different. His is very pointy and beaky. He's got a large nose that sticks out, larger lips that stick out. That's because his ancestors are from a hotter climate where those things didn't really matter. But his are from a colder climate. And so you'll notice the lips don't stick out very far because if they had, his ancestors would have frozen their lips off. His nose is much more flatter against his face because, again, it protects against frostbite. And he has more fatty deposits around his eyes because that protected your eyeballs from freezing. And so you can tell a little bit about where someone's ancestors came from, no matter where they are now, based on their facial features. So you can see that this girl must have come from ancestors that lived in a very cold place where there wasn't much sunlight because she has extremely pale skin and would not do well in a very sunny environment. And this girl from South America, you can tell that she has ancestors from a very hot place where there was a lot of sun because she has the very dark hair and the very dark skin. So I hope that gives you some things to think about. These things are extremely interesting, and the things that we're going to be looking at over the next few days will help you predict what type of genetic traits your children will inherit, which is interesting to think about.